Again, Dr. Saleh is at the University of Kansas, and I'm just going to let him get straight to it. I'll stop talking.
I want to start today with a spectacular picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. We heard a lot about Lindenmeier. We heard a lot about what we know about Folsom behavior. I'm a punk. I'm going to tell you about what we don't know. I'm going to take a kind of a different stand here. And I want to start with this picture because it's one of my favorite pictures. Ed Curtis, what a picture. That picture tells more about culture, about people, about traditions than any kind of Folsom Point. I know I've stared at Folsom Points for a long time. You can stare at them for hours and hours. They will not tell you much about culture. So I want to kind of just start that discussion with you and tell you really about what we do not know about Lindenmeier and why Lindenmeier is so important. And in my mind, it is important for what we do not know. It is important for what we know, but there's still so much to learn. This, of course, is a picture from the Northwest Coast, so it seems to be completely unrelated to Lindenmeier. And I'm going to use a lot of ethnographic analogies, comparison between the archaeological record and the Paleontological record in particular, and what we know about living cultures. I do not intend to say that there are any kind of similarities. This is not a picture of a Paleontologian person who lived at Lindenmeier. But if we could go back in time, if we could take a snapshot of what happened there, I hope we would have the same kind of intensity in that person's eyes as what you see here. My point is that there's much more to learn than what just Folsom Points can tell us. My involvement with Lindenmeier, with all I'm saying, started because I was interested in Folsom Points. And Folsom Points are, of course, the most spectacular aspect of the site. It's what everybody wants to see when they go to the Smithsonian. And so I was very fortunate to go to the Smithsonian in 2009, 2010. It's been a long time already. And I was looking to learn more about not so much the process of Folsom Point manufacture, but the context in which they were made. And so I started to look at the channel flakes, and what you have there to your left are all the channel flakes of Lindenmeier, and there are a lot of them. I've seen every single one of them. And there are close to 1,000 channel flakes. I measure them. I have pictures of them. And I was also interested in the projectile points and the preforms. And you see some of the frames to the right. Obviously, there's a lot of those artifacts. And kind of Jason told us a little bit about how unique Lindenmeier is, and this should put it into perspective. This is just the number of projectile points for a series of Folsom sites. And Lindenmeier is to your right. It's out there as being one of the richest assemblage of Folsom-related artifacts anywhere in the West. So as I was working with those points, I'm one of those guys who, I like to inflict pain on myself. So I do a lot of refitting. Nicole talked about how painstaking it is. So I started to refit some of those points and channel flakes, and here you have a channel flake that refits on the preform. So that's mostly what I was in Washington, D.C. For. And as I was doing this, I really needed to make sure that I was looking at every single preform and every single channel flake. So I'm kind of a type A personality. This is, by the way, in my mind, this is the solution to Lindenmeier. This picture tells you why people came repeatedly at Lindenmeier and what they did at Lindenmeier. especially the piece, the engraved bone to the left. I mean, it's obvious that Lindenmeier was like an early pedoin in Vegas. This is a game piece. Every time I look at it, I can't imagine this being anything else than a game piece. But anyway, my point is that there's a lot more to the Lindenmeier collection than just the projectile points and even the stone tools. We've talked a little bit about the beads this morning, and you have an example to the left. It's a piece of hematite that started to be drilled, probably a preform for one of those beads we talked about. The piece to the left, it's an engraved bone. I don't know what it is about, but we can, gambling is probably what attracted people to Lindenmeier. As I was doing this, I was opening every single door at the Smithsonian and looking at every artifact I could find from the site. And I encountered that catalog piece here, and you can say that on top, I don't know if you see very well, but it says rough lump of coarse sandstone. So I was looking at the object in that box, that rough lump of coarse sandstone, and to me it didn't seem that rough, and it didn't seem that coarse. It was sandstone, all right. And I looked at it and I said, this is a pipe. It's modified. And the first, of course, we will talk about whether this is indeed a pipe, but that was the first idea that came to my mind. So I went to Dennis, and I showed it to Dennis. Dennis said, holy guacamole. Well, not really holy guacamole. He has a reputation to maintain, so I can't really tell you what he said. Holy smoke maybe has one letter that is closer to the reality. One more letter that makes it closer to what he said. So holy guacamole, that's one of the coolest things I've seen in a long time. This obviously was a modified piece of rock, a modified piece of stone. And if you look at it carefully, you can see that it has a bigger hole to the left and a smaller hole to the right. So my conversation with Dennis, this is pipe. It'd be very interesting to see if there are any kinds of residues inside. And Dennis said, well, let's go and do a CAT scan. I said, wait a minute. We can't just go and do a CAT scan like that. He said, yeah. They all, the CAT scan is just a few doors away. And I was thinking, do you have any idea how complicated it is for me to do a CAT scan of anything? I mean, it's like a lot of paperwork. It's not covered by my medical insurance. So but he said, well, they just did a CAT scan of a Stradivarius violin. They're always bugging me to do archaeological artifacts. So we can just go and walk there and do a CAT scan. So now, guys, you know that your taxpayer money is well spent. So that's what we did. We did a CAT scan of that object. And I'm not going to call it a pipe anymore, mostly because Peggy is going to be upset at me if I do. But I'm not going to call it a pipe, but let's call it a stone tube. Okay? And you can see that what is interesting, we didn't find any evidence of residues or anything inside that was obviously present in that object. But we learned quite a bit by just doing a quick CAT scan. First, you can see that the inside is very irregular. So that cavity was not drilled. This is a natural cavity. With the exception to the small hole to your right, that little hole here is extremely regular. And you can see that it is kind of triangular in shape. So Jason, and Cody, I think I found the object that was used for the drill. It's not the bead. The drill that you guys found, drilled that hole here. This is obviously modified. So we have two different things going on. We have some sort of natural stone object with a natural cavity, and we have a hole that has been drilled at one end. And you get a better view of that end here. So this is the smallest hole. I think I have a close-up. Notice there's a lot of polish too around the hole. There's also a dark red stain, whether that is just hematite that has been added to it or is just a result of the polish on the material itself, on the sandstone, because it was used and handled for a long time. It's not clear. But there is evidence of use of that object because of the polish that you can see here. The other end is a little bit different. The other end was not drilled. It was mostly enlarged. And you can see it was ground. So it was modified as well. So what we have is a piece of rock that was probably picked up. And the big question is, what kind of rock? So Dennis and I, we talked about it, and we came to the conclusion that it's probably a rhizoconcretion. It's kind of a natural concretion that grows around the roots. This one is unusually large. The size is like a big cigar. So it's unusually large, but in terms of shape, and that's all we could think of as far as coming up with an explanation for the natural occurrence of something like this. So somebody picked up rhizoconcretion on the landscape and modified it by drilling a hole at one end and by grinding the other end. So why would you do that? And what is the object for? Here's by the way, the other end, and you can see it doesn't have the same kind of polish, but it does have a modification. So before we get to the why, there are a series of questions. First, where does it come from at Lindenmeier? And so Cody talked a little bit about the history of excavation, and Roberts excavated mostly two main areas that you see here, Area 1 and Area 2. And this is Roberts' map, and on top you have kind of an aerial view of the site today, and it allows you to kind of situate those excavation areas. Well, the card is pretty important here because it gives us the section number. 04M refers to the section, to the unit in which that object was found. So we can actually put that back on the map, and we know that that object came from Area 1 at Lindenmeier. And we know exactly which section it came from, which is highlighted there for you. And it's part of the main excavation. The object was found towards in 1938. The Smithsonian will excavate at the site until the 1940s. So towards the end of their involvement at Lindenmeier, that's when that object was found. And that was a time where they were keeping pretty good records of what had been excavated there. This is the location of the stone tube with regard to other artifacts. This is a map of the debitage, density of debitage. And you can see that the stone tube was found not necessarily in an area where we have a lot of other stone tools, but just kind of the margin there of a relatively dense area. Okay. So we know where it came from. The question now is it Paleoindian, and is it Folsom if it is Paleoindian? That, of course, is much more complicated because you cannot date stones. So we could not run a radiocarbon date on that object. And so we have to rely on the quality of the notes and the little information we know about how Roberts excavated the site. Well, one of the things we know is that they removed a lot of overburden at the site. And this is a picture where you can see they use a team of horse to kind of dig that big pit and the trench area that Cody talked about. And the same technique was applied to remove most of the sediments above the dark horizon, the dark horizon that you see over there at the bottom where that individual is excavating. That is the Folsom Age paleosoil. If you read the notes, it seems clear that at the time where the pipe was found, or I made the mistake, the stone tube was found, they were removing the overburden, and they started the excavation only on top of the dark layer. So that suggests to us that that area, that section of the site was excavated, and when they started excavating very carefully, and when they started excavation, they started excavating Paleogene age material. The card, again, helps us a little bit. The card gives us the section and the unit, and if you can read here, it says Folsom Complex. So by the time that artifact was cataloged, and maybe Ed Wilmson can tell us more about all this, by the time that that artifact was cataloged, it was cataloged as coming from Lindenmeier, from that unit 4M, and as being of Folsom age, similar to all the other artifacts. We know now that there are other Paleogene artifacts that came from that area, Area 1, and that came from Lindenmeier, in particular a series of Cody points. However, none of these were recovered in any kind of context. Most of them were found in the trench and in the big pit. So we know there is a Cody component to the Lindenmeier site, so there is a late Paleogene component, a more recent Paleogene component than Folsom. So there is always a possibility that stone tube comes from a later Paleogene component. However, the catalog, and that's all we have as far as provenance, that catalog card is pretty specific and tells us that it is probably a Paleogene age. Roberts kept all the tools where all the small flakes and debitage was later discarded. These were mapped but discarded. The bones were mapped as well and discarded. So there's a lot of material that is missing today from the Lindenmeier excavation. I went back to the original maps and I could not find any direct evidence of that object, that stone tube. So all we can do is kind of speculate about, unfortunately, all we can do is kind of speculate about its provenance. It is pretty clear that the strongest indication and the best indication we have today is that it belonged to the Folsom component at Lindenmeier. Before, I'm not going to say too much about all this, but if you look at Area 1 and the diagram to the left maps all the Folsom points, and the diagram to the right maps all the channel flakes and preforms. It gives you an idea of the different activities taking place at the site. And I don't have the fine resolution that Nicole has at Barger Gulch, but this at least allows you to kind of contextualize the location of that find. And what we know is that all the projectile points were kind of scattered and dispersed in locality 1. There were a little bit, a few points there, a few points over there. There doesn't seem to be really intense activity areas that relate to point manufacture either. If you look at the channel flakes, they cluster in zones that are a little bit different from where the projectile points are discarded. Well, that suggests that Area 1 was probably a palimpsest of occupation. So rather than one long occupation, kind of like Barger Gulch, it's most likely that surface recorded multiple short-term occupations. That's all I have right now, but that's the context in which that stone tube was left behind. So what is it? Well, here we are. We all know that if we add a few words to an image, we change the meaning. And I'm going to add a few words to that stone tube and trying to kind of extract some information about its use. And in the process, I'm trying not to confuse you too much. Okay. So is it a pipe or not? And if it's not a pipe, what is it? Are there other evidence of stone tubes in the archaeological record? that are not necessarily used for smoking or related to smoking. So as archaeologists, when we don't know what we are looking at, it's really complicated. We need a frame of reference. And there are two ways we can build a frame of reference. One is going back to the archaeological record and seeing what has been done elsewhere and use that piece of knowledge. The other frame of reference is, of course, the ethnographic record. It is the living people, all the observations we've made about how they lived. And Nicole has made a good case for demonstrating how powerful that kind of analogy can be. So I'm going to try to use both in my exploration of the function of that stone tube. And so let's start with the archaeological record, and let's see if there's anything else that has ever been found that kind of relates to that stone tube. Well, the earliest evidence that I could find, there's a tube that comes from the Jurgen site. I'm sorry, I don't have any picture of it, but other than that, the earliest evidence that I could find in the archaeological record it comes from that site in Idaho, which is a mortuary site. It's a series of pipes, half a dozen pipes, and they were, I'm not the one calling them pipe, they were called pipe by the excavators, that were found in association with at least the burial of two individuals. If you look carefully, some of them are quite similar to the Lindenmeier stone tube, especially the one to the right there, with a small hole and a much larger one on the other side. Most of them were actually broken. You break object when they enter the mortuary, a mortuary context. Once you want to destroy the power they have. And objects in most traditional culture are symbolic. They are not just utilitarian. And by breaking them, what you do, you symbolically kill them, and you break the power they have. And a lot of the mortuary offerings and grave goods we find in the archaeological record are actually broken artifacts. And this is exactly what we see here. The Lindenmeier piece is complete. It is not broken. But most of the ones that I'm going to talk about have been found in the archaeological record broken. George Friesen published that a series of finds made in Wyoming, a little bit closer to here, but a dozen tubes made out of steatite. They were not in any kind of archaeological context there. What is kind of interesting that they were all found together, kind of like a cache of object of a dozen of these tubes. Some were engraved. The ones that were engraved represent birds. Birds also, if we talk about symbolism, are important native symbols. They can travel and carry the message to the spirits because they can fly. We humans, we're stuck on Earth. We can't fly. We can't leave the world of the living, but the animals can. They have that power, and birds are some of these animals. So there may be some symbolism here that we are starting to catch that could tell us a little bit more about what happened. But what is important here is that those objects were also broken, ritually killed, just like the ones from Idaho. And you can see that this one in particular has also morphologies that are similar to the Lindenmeier stone tube, small hole on one end and much larger hole on the other hand. So we do have an archaeological record. How the Wyoming finds are probably late prehistoric in age, maybe even more recent. They have not been dated as far. Maybe George can tell us more about it, but I don't think they have been dated accurately, at least not since they've been published. So unless there's more data, I can't place it in any kind of chronological context. Those tubes are quite common in the Southwest and in the South, even as far as California, where archaeologists refer to them as cloud blowers. Some of them have been discovered with an insert, and here you have an example that has a bird bone insert on the smaller end, which is not to say that the Lindenmeier artifact had such an insert. I'm just giving you this as a possibility. So we do have a series of cloud blowers with those inserts. Most of the cloud blowers we find in the archaeological record are also found in mortuary contexts. They are either grave goods offerings or associated with mortuary rituals and practices. And here you see a shaman blowing smoke over the deceased in a way to purify that body. If we go a little bit elsewhere in North America, we have a lot of those tubes that start to show up in the Midwest with Adena. Middle woodland, late woodland, and even Mississippian times. We see a huge number of these objects. This is one, and here's another example of some of those Adena tubes, including a preform or several preforms representing the different stages of manufacture, where obviously you grind them until they reach the final form. A lot of these Adena tube have a little pebble insert, so that tells us that they were used to smoke, to probably inhale smoke, and the pebble would kind of block all the material and so as you would inhale the smoke, you would not inhale all the burning material at the same time. This is about the time in the archaeological record where we find the earliest evidence of tobacco. Okay, I have not mentioned tobacco yet, but tobacco was native to the Americas, North and South America. It was probably available to Paleoindians, which doesn't mean that they used it. It was available for a long period of time, but yet in the archaeological record, it makes a relatively late appearance. We find traces of tobacco in those Adena pipes, and now we can call them pipes. We also find evidence of tobacco in later pipes, like those beautiful effigy pipes from the Hopewell and Mississippian times. The one to the left is a frog, and the one to the right is a bird. So obviously there's a lot of symbolism, again, that is built into those objects. At that time, we know that they were used for smoking. We also know that they enter the archaeological record, again, in mortuary context. They are found in mounds. There are caches of them, very often broken, sometimes complete. But this is probably the apex of kind of the pipe smoking in North American archaeology. It's pretty much everywhere at the time. Everybody's doing it. Since, you just need to watch a movie from the 60s. Everybody's smoking. And, well, that's what those Mississippian people were doing. Whether they were smoking for pleasure, whether they were ritualistically using tobacco, that's something different, and I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes. Do we have any representations in the archaeological record of any of the stone tubes or any kind of tubes or pipes being used? Well, we do. They're extremely rare, but they do exist. And here's an example from the Southwest. A series of smoker effigies. They're ceramics, and you can see that they show individuals with holding a tube in their mouth, whether they're smoking or whether they're doing something else. That I want to raise that question later. But they are typically called smoker effigies by archaeologists. However, we know we are very often wrong. We talked about Mississippian. Here's an effigy pipe of an individual holding an effigy pipe. Talk about introspection. And based on the hairstyle, that's probably a shaman, and using an effigy pipe shaped like the frog that I showed you earlier. Those are extremely rare instances, so we cannot really use the archaeological, and they are late in time. So they date from the time where we know that people are smoking tobacco. They may not really tell us much about the Lindenmeier object. So the archaeological record is there. It's very scant and limited. It doesn't really solve all the issues and doesn't tell us much about it. But it does put things into perspective, and it tends to relate the use of these objects with mortuary practices, very special rituals, and these are the domain of the shaman. And the shaman, I gave you here kind of a summary of what they do. They are the intermediary between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. We're human, we're dull, we can't do much, we can't leave that earth. But animals can, they have special powers. And shaman can. And they can use those special powers by transforming themselves into animals, among other things. And so they are kind of the intermediary between the world of the living, us, and the world of the dead and the world of the spirit. And they travel to the world of the spirit to gather information that is useful to us, and they share that with us, and they use that information to kind of reinforce their social role. So what about the ethnographic context? And again, what I want to demonstrate here is not that the solution of the function of the Lindenmeier tube is to be found in the ethnographic record. What I want to give you is a sense of the richness of those practices. Okay, so that stone tube really tells us about what we don't know. How it was used, I cannot tell you. I can only speculate. But by going through the ethnographic record, you can see that there is a tremendous amount of information out there in South America and in North America about the use of those tubes, whether they're used for smoking or whether they're used in a context without smoke. They are universally found in North and South America. So they represent an extremely rich tradition that is really deeply rooted in native traditions. Okay, so let's start with South America. The first thing I like, this is a shaman from the Amazon basin. The first thing I want you to notice is what part of that pipe he holds in his mouth. It is not the small end. It is the large end that goes towards the mouth. The second thing that I found out through my peregrination with the ethnoarchaeological record is that smoke is not just inhaled. Smoke is also blown. And here you have a shaman blowing smoke to sanctify some food and some specific roots. Again, notice that the small hole is not the one that is going in the mouth. It is the large hole that is put against the mouth, and the smoke is blown through that object, through the small hole. So there's all sorts of interesting things that you can, use the ethnographic record. Because my first reaction is, hey, it's a cigar, you put the small end and, you use that as a pipe. Well, I learned that I was really, really wrong, and that the ethnographic record is much richer than that. What I also found out is that smoking is only secondary to a lot of those practices, shamanistic practices. And there's maybe more to the Lindenmeier tube itself than just it being used as a pipe. Yes, it may have been used as a pipe, but if that was the case, whether it was to inhale smoke or to blow smoke, the important aspect was not the smoke. It was the act of blowing. One very interesting case in the ethnographic record was recorded by a British anthropologist, Audrey Butt, in the 50s. She worked with the Acahuayo group, natives of Guyana and Venezuela. And they have a very interesting practice, which is called tailing, and where people blow. So they force their breath through their mouth or their nose to blow, and everybody in the group is going to blow. So it's not just one shaman, and it's not just one individual. Some people are better at it than others, and they're recognized for the skills. But everybody can do that. So it's a fairly common practice. Okay? So why do they blow? Well, those people have the notion that blowing, the act of blowing, it represents the individual spirit. The spirit is said to be like a breeze, and when you feel the wind passing by, what you felt is a spirit pass by. Okay, so there's a direct connection between the wind and breath and spirits and spiritual life. They have different terms to describe the blowing, the ritual blowing, so the breath that you're going to blow in a ritual act, and the breath that you take to breathe. Those are two completely different words that enter the language that are completely unrelated. That tell us that those are very different functions, symbolic function within the group and within the society. So when you blow, what you do is you send a message. So you can blow towards a person. Distance is irrelevant. That person can be next to you, that person can be extremely far away from you. The message will reach that person. And so you blow in the direction of the person or the thing you want to affect. For instance, if you see a storm brewing and the clouds are coming and you want to kind of counter the effects of the negative effects of the storm, you blow in the direction of the storm. The fact that it's far away doesn't really matter. So there are all sorts of rituals that are associated with this, and blowing can be done for good things, but also for pretty much darn evil things. You can send a sickness to someone by blowing. So it is believed that the sickness is transmitted through blowing, and as you do that, you insert an object into the body of the sick person. That object can be a small pebble, a branch, a small feather. That is what is going to make that person sick. It penetrates them, causes the illness. But blowing can also bring good luck. And you can blow in an area where you're going to go hunting in a way to ensure that you're going to be lucky and bring back game. So blowing has that very ambiguous meaning to them, but it's something that is extremely powerful. Now you can add smoke to it. You can add tobacco. What tobacco does, it just enhances the effects. Tobacco permits this to the effect to be extremely more powerful and more long-lasting. So tobacco is just an added artifice to the act of tailing, the act of blowing. It is not the main or the major component here. If the patient is really ill, a shaman is going to be called, and the shaman is going to try to cure that individual by sucking that object that is making that person ill. And that can be done, and in the case of those groups, it's mostly, and I think I have a picture here where you see the shaman sucking the bad spirit, the evil, combating the evil that made that baby sick. And so suddenly you can see that breathing and breath has a very, very important symbolic meaning. And when we talked about smoking in other societies and in other contexts, we very often, the first thing we think about is tobacco or the use of any kind of other plants. Those plants are really only part of the story. They help the process, they help in the process, and tobacco is sacred for most native cultures. But it's only one of the ingredients. It's not the most essential ingredient. Okay? And here you have a shaman healing someone by blowing smoke on them. The other thing that I learned is that, well, you have those stone tubes, and in that case, they're pipes because they're used to blow or inhale smoke. But they are not always used at all. There are sometimes other objects that also are used in conjunction with those tubes that are part of the story as well. So you can't really look at something like the stone tube at Lindenmeier and think that, well, you know everything about it. And it's maybe only one aspect of the story. And what you have here is a Tucano shaman smoking a cigar, and this is rolled directly out of tobacco. Again, you see the large piece is in the mouth, and the smaller piece is away from the mouth. And he's sitting on a ritual seat, wooden seat, and holding the cigar with some sort of special device. What is important here is the notion that that space is sacred and very much individualized. And what I've encountered throughout my readings of the ethnographic record is the notion that the pipe represents the main, the axis of the world, that connection between the world of the spirit and the world of the living. This is a very important notion. Before we go back to the question I raised, what is the Lindenmeier tube for? What was it used for? Let's go to North America. Let's go to something that is a little bit closer and see if we have any evidence. We also have, of course, in North America, we have the ceremony of the Calumet, and here you have the Iroquois using pipes. So I'm not going to talk too much about the smoking here in that context. But we have the same kind of really rich ethnographic record that tells us about healing. And again, healing is one aspect of what shamans do. And in this case, you have a crow who is using a bird bone and not an insert now, but just a tube to suck the disease out of the sick person. And you can see that in that case, it was either a bone or a black beetle or a morsel of meat, any kind of foreign object that made that person sick. So we have that long tradition in North America as well. It's not just South America, it is North America. It's kind of a Pan-American thing, which suggests that it has a long history. That is, it's not to say that the Crow story or beliefs or myth are the same as the stories and myth that we encounter in the Amazon basin. I don't want to really minimize the richness of that heritage, but I want to draw the attention to you that because it has that kind of universal meaning, it must have a really deep past. It must have a really rich past, and that past you can't extract from Folsom points. You can't extract it from end scrapers. You can't extract it from gravers. There's only that much social information of a social structure, social activities that we can extract from the archaeological record. It takes some really special objects to kind of just hint at what we're missing. And so my question earlier was, what is the tube? Is it a pipe? Well, unfortunately, I do not know. Until we try to see if there are any residues in the tube, we'll not know whether it was used for smoking. There is no direct evidence that it was ever used for smoking. However, there is a lot of wear on that object that tells us that it was used on a regular basis. Somebody picked up a natural formation and went into a lot of trouble modifying it, carrying it, and using it for a very long period of time. If this is indeed a shaman tool, which I think it is, this makes it probably the oldest shaman tool ever found anywhere in the world. We're talking about something that is 12,000 years old, and there's really no equivalent in the archaeological record anywhere in the world, if it is indeed Folsom, which, again, we can only speculate. So what is it? I do not know. What I know is that it was probably extremely significant, extremely important to the people at Lindenmeier. In the same way as when we chat and when we talk, what do we talk about? We ask, we talk about the weather. We talked about, TV programs. Well, the Lindenmeier people did not talk about Folsom point styles. They did not talk about how many spurs on their gravers. They talked about the weather, and they talked about their stories and their myth, and they share that. And that object is what it's a very tenuous link, but it's one that really connects us to that type of behavior, the type of culture, the type of information. So as we go through the rest of the symposium, I kind of want you to always keep this in mind, that we are talking about people. We're talking about people who had a rich life, a rich and extremely complex culture. That culture is gone forever, but there are a few objects and a few special sites, and Lindenmeier is one of them, that can connect us to that past and heritage. Thank you very much.
I told you I wouldn't ask a question. You asked me not to.
No, Eric.
No.
You can't answer.
The only thing I'm going to ask is, are there certain, in the ethnographic record, have you come across any information on, are there certain periods of time when a shaman is needed more than other periods of time? A cold period, a warm period, a famine period?
When you talk periods of time, it is period in prehistory where we have greater evidence of shamanistic practices and behavior?
Yeah, is it a sort of cycle that might increase or decrease when you need a shaman more in your society than you don't? Or
it's almost impossible for me to answer that for a very simple reason, is that the signature of any kind of shamanistic behavior or any kind of practices that relate to shaman is almost invisible in the archaeological record. We only have those very rare instances where the special objects tells us that it was there, and that's why they really serve as a reminder of the richness of the cultures that we're missing. It's not because it's not there in the archaeological record that it was not there. And that's something that we need to keep in mind and really reflect upon. Dimensions of the tube. Like I said, like a big cigar, and it's shaped very much also like a cigar. I didn't talk too much, about the phallic symbolism, but I'm sure some of you saw that. The color of it, it's a color of red, which is the color of life and the color of sun, probably had very important meaning for whoever used it and selected it as well. A lot of those pipes over time were selected, the pipestone was red, and they were probably selecting the type of rock for its special color. So there are all sorts of other aspects I never got to get into. Could it be a straw? It could be a lot of different things. That a straw, I don't think it would function as a straw, but it could be a musical instrument, a game caller. There are other. There's really nothing more satisfactory that I could find in terms of reference than what I presented to you. There are musical instruments. There are game callers that you could probably imitate the call of an elk or something, or maybe a bison with it. I don't know if anybody is good at it. We should try. There are other functions that of course we could come up with and may explain it based on the archaeological record and based on what we know. These are the most plausible explanations, but I'm not saying truth. So the question is, would there be any residues if it's used as a shaman sucking tube? So if it's used as a healing tube, no, there would not be any residues. But keep in mind also that if it's part of the shaman paraphernalia, there's no reason that it's one or the other. There's no reason that you cannot blow smoke or inhale smoke or just use it as a sucking tube altogether. So we can't just categorize these and think about one dimension and thinking that those objects were used only for one or the other. It's very possible that once the shaman owned that object that was extremely powerful, that was selected for its important quality, color, connection to the earth, and all that, it's very possible that that object may have been used for multi-purposes. So the question is, was the CAT scan of Lindenmeier in any way different from other stone tubes? Most of the other, you're correct, most of the other stone tubes I've encountered in the literature are drilled. And there are many ways you can drill that. Stone is really hard, so you can use another piece of stone and a stone drill, which is probably what was used to drill that small hole. But you can also use friction and sand and water to drill a hole into a hard stone. There are all sorts of other ways to do it. But yeah, most of those, I've not found any other evidence of a concretion being used other than that possible concretion found at Jurgens, which is another Paleo-Indian site. Nothing in the archaeological record that kind of replicates exactly what we have at Lindenmeier. I do not really know. There are some red stain, dark red stain on the tube. At that point, I cannot tell you if this is hematite or ochre stain, or if it just represents the rubbing of that surface in those specific areas that kind of created that difference in color. Yeah, Cody and Jason talked a little bit about red ochre at Lindenmeier. It's one of the sites where we have a lot of hematite, a lot of red ochre. Some of it was drilled, whether it was to extract to make it into a powder or whether it was used to transform those pieces of hematite. We don't know. But there's a lot of evidence of hematite at Lindenmeier. There is a hematite found in other Paleo-Indian sites. The Folsom component at the Yadkin Basin site comes to mind, and maybe George can tell us more about other examples. Red ochre occurs usually at campsites, so we don't necessarily see it at kill sites. We find it at campsites, and we find it in mortuary contexts. At the Enzik site has red ochre, and these are the first that come to mind. So there are other evidence of red ochre used by Paleo-Indian people. I see you this afternoon.